Chinyere had always been the first to arrive at the community well each morning, a habit passed down through the women in her family. She would make her way down the narrow dirt path that led to the well, her clay pot in hand, the sky still dark above her. The air was cool and crisp, and the stars above her village blinked like tiny eyes in the night. The village of Umuadu was quiet, save for the occasional rustling of leaves from the trees or the faint sound of an owl calling in the distance. The only other sound was the rhythmic gurgling of the water as it flowed from the well's stone mouth. The well had been the heart of the village for as long as anyone could remember. It was here that the elders gathered to discuss matters of great importance, and where the young ones learned the values of the village: respect, hard work, and a deep connection to the land. It was a sacred place, as much a part of Chinyere's childhood as the sounds of her mother's lullabies or the warmth of her father's hands. She approached it now with the same reverence she had as a child. She bent down to fill her pot, watching the water swirl in the cool stone basin. As she did, the sound of footsteps broke the quiet. She didn't need to look up to know who it was. She knew Obinna's walk, his steady pace that echoed through the stillness of the morning. He was always the second to arrive, often carrying his own clay pot. He would nod to her, a quiet acknowledgement, and wait for her to finish her task before starting his own. Though their interaction was simple, there was something unspoken between them. A quiet understanding, a bond that had formed over the years, born of shared mornings and the weight of the water pots they both carried. This routine had gone on for months now, ever since Chinyere's father had passed away and left her in charge of the household. They exchanged small talk, stories about the weather, the harvest, or the state of the village. But it was always brief, never lingering. Yet, there was something in the way Obinna looked at her that made her heart flutter, something about the way his dark eyes caught hers and held them a little longer than necessary. It was as if he was seeing her for more than just the girl who fetched water every morning. Chinyere often found herself stealing glances at Obinna when he wasn't looking. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his skin dark like the earth they both tended. His smile, though rare, had the power to light up the darkest corners of her heart. And every time he spoke, his voice, low and steady, seemed to settle over her like a comforting blanket. There was something about him that felt like home. And though neither of them had spoken the words aloud, she couldn't deny that the attraction was real, simmering beneath the surface of their casual exchanges. As the days passed, their quiet meetings at the well became a part of Chinyere's daily rhythm. She found herself looking forward to the mornings, when she would see Obinna standing by the well, waiting for her. Their conversations began to grow, no longer limited to small talk. They spoke of everything, of dreams for the future, of life in the village, and of the many challenges that came with it. Chinyere learned that Obinna's family had lived in Umuadu for generations, his ancestors' hands having tilled the very soil that they both walked on. His pride in his heritage was evident every time he spoke of the village, its customs, and the deep-rooted connection to the land. He had a quiet reverence for the traditions that had been passed down through the years, and it was clear that he cherished the way of life his family had built. In contrast, Chinyere had always felt the pull of something beyond the village. She had grown up with stories of faraway places, stories of cities with tall buildings and streets filled with people from all walks of life. Her heart had always yearned for something more than the simple life that the village offered. It wasn't that she didn't love her home, but there was a restlessness in her, a desire to explore the world beyond the hills that encircled Umuadu. One morning as the sky began to rise, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Obinna's voice broke the silence. "Chinyere," he said softly, "do you ever wonder what life would be like if we left here? If we went somewhere else, somewhere far from the village?" The question took Chinyere by surprise. She had never really considered leaving. The idea had always seemed foreign, something that belonged to other people, people who didn't have the deep ties she had to the village. But hearing Obinna say it out loud made her wonder. What would it be like to leave behind the well, the fields, the people she had known her whole life? Could she find happiness in a world beyond Umuadu? Chinyere hesitated, not sure how to answer. "I don't know," she said slowly. "I've never really thought about it. But I suppose it's always been in the back of my mind, like a dream I never really allowed myself to chase." Obinna smiled faintly, his eyes distant as he stared at the water in the well. "Sometimes I think we're all just waiting for something to change," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But maybe we have to be the ones to make the change." Chinyere nodded, feeling a stirring in her chest. Obinna's words lingered in her mind long after they had left the well that morning, and for the first time in a long while, she wondered if change was something she could truly embrace. As the days passed, the weight of Obinna's words lingered in Chinyere's mind. She had never given much thought to leaving the village. The idea seemed almost impossible, like a distant dream that belonged to someone else. But now, with Obinna's quiet contemplation echoing in her thoughts, she couldn't help but wonder. What would life be like beyond Umuadu? Would the world outside offer her the freedom to chase the dream she had never dared to voice aloud? One evening, Chinyere sat beneath the shade of a tall mango tree near her family's compound, staring out over the fields that stretched as far as the eye could see. The land was everything to her family. It was their livelihood, their history, their identity. Her father had always said that the soil of Umuadu was sacred, that it connected them to their ancestors. He spoke with such reverence for the land, and she had always respected that. But now she wasn't so sure. Her family had been living in Umuadu for generations, their roots dug deep into the earth. But with each passing day, Chinyere felt more like a stranger in her own home. She longed for something different, something that would take her beyond the familiar horizons of the village. The world outside seemed full of promise, full of opportunities she couldn't even begin to fathom. But at what cost? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. She looked up to see Obinna, his broad shoulders outlined against the setting sun. He had the same calm expression on his face, but there was something in his eyes, a question that he seemed hesitant to ask. "Chinyere," he said softly, sitting beside her. "I've been thinking a lot lately. About the future. About what it means for us to stay here." Chinyere turned to face him, her heart racing. She had known this conversation was coming, but she wasn't prepared for it. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Obinna sighed, looking out at the fields. "I know this land is important to us, to our families. But sometimes I wonder if there's more out there. A different life. A chance to build something new outside of the old ways. A chance to grow, to be more than what we are here." Chinyere's breath caught in her throat. She had always known Obinna was different. He wasn't afraid to question the traditions that held the village together. He had an adventurous spirit, one that longed for something beyond the confines of their small world. And in that moment, Chinyere realized that she shared that same yearning. "I understand," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I feel the same way, Obinna. But how can we leave? How can we abandon everything we've known?" Obinna turned to her, his eyes soft but determined. "Maybe we don't have to abandon it. Maybe we can find a way to honor the past and still move forward." Chinyere didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she felt the stirrings of hope. Could they truly build a new life, one that honored their heritage while embracing the promise of something more? The path ahead was unclear, but with Obinna by her side, she felt ready to take the first step. It was a few days later when the news arrived. Chinyere had just returned from the market when her mother called her over. "You won't believe it, Chinyere," her mother said, her face a mix of excitement and concern. "The elders have called a meeting. A foreign company wants to buy the land around the well. They want to develop it into a resort or some kind of commercial area." Chinyere felt the blood drain from her face. "What do they want with our land?" she asked, her voice trembling. Her mother shook her head. "They say it's for progress. For development. They'll pay the village a large sum in return. But the well, our land, it'll be gone. The elders have to decide." Chinyere's heart pounded in her chest. The well, so much more than just a source of water, was the lifeblood of their community. It was the place where their ancestors had drawn water, where traditions were passed down, where families had grown. Losing it would mean losing a part of their history. And yet, the offer from the foreign company was tempting. The promise of new roads, better schools, and improved infrastructure could change everything for the villagers. But at what cost? Would the village be able to hold on to its identity if the land was sold? And what would that mean for people like Chinyere and Obinna, who were struggling with their own sense of belonging? That evening, Chinyere met Obinna at the well. They stood in silence for a long time, both of them grappling with the weight of the decision that loomed over the village. Finally, Obinna spoke. "I don't know what to think, Chinyere," he said, his voice low. "On one hand, the money could change things. It could bring progress to the village. But on the other hand, it feels like we'd be losing something we can never get back." Chinyere nodded, her heart aching. She could feel the pull of both worlds, the world of tradition and heritage and the world of change and opportunity. But which one should she choose? Could she truly leave everything behind for a new life? Or would the weight of her heritage bind her forever to the land around the well? The days that followed were filled with heated discussions in the village. The elders met, debated, and deliberated, but no decision had been made. The foreign company's representatives returned several times, bringing with them promises of modernity and opportunity. The village, as much as it clung to its traditions, could not ignore the appeal of a better life, a life that might pull them out of poverty and provide them with the comforts of a world beyond their small rural existence. Chinyere and Obinna found themselves caught in the middle of it all. They had spent years at the well, sharing quiet moments and unspoken dreams. But now the future of their village, of their home, was at stake. They could no longer ignore the question that had been growing in their hearts. What was more important, the past they had inherited or the future they longed to create? One evening, as Chinyere walked through the village, she overheard her father speaking to the village elders about an offer they had received. A foreign company had shown interest in purchasing the land around the well, hoping to develop it for a new project. The elders were divided. Some saw it as an opportunity for progress, while others feared it would destroy the heart of their village. Chinyere's heart sank as she realized that the well, the very place where she and Obinna had shared so many quiet moments, was in danger. The weight of the decision would fall on the villagers' shoulders, and it would soon change everything. She found Obinna by the well the next morning, her thoughts racing. "Have you heard about the offer?" she asked, her voice quiet. Obinna nodded, his expression unreadable. "I've heard," he said, his voice low. "It's hard to believe that the land we've all known for so long could be sold off so easily." Chinyere felt the weight of his words. The well was more than just a source of water, it was a symbol of their history, their culture. To lose it would be to lose a part of themselves. She didn't know what to think, but as she looked at Obinna, she realized that this decision would affect more than just the land, it would change their future. The days dragged on, heavy with the uncertainty that had descended upon the village. The elders met, debated, and deliberated, but no decision had been made. The foreign company's representatives returned several times, bringing with them promises of modernity and opportunity. The village, as much as it clung to its traditions, could not ignore the appeal of a better life, a life that might pull them out of poverty and provide them with the comforts of a world beyond their small rural existence. Chinyere's thoughts were torn. She had been raised to honor her heritage, to protect the land, the stories, and the customs that had been passed down through the generations. Yet, in the quiet moments by the well, with Obinna beside her, she began to wonder if those traditions could survive without the physical space they had always occupied. Would the heart of the village, its very soul, be lost if they left? Or could they find a way to carry their heritage with them, even in a new world? She could see the conflict in Obinna's eyes. The same restlessness that had always defined him was now paired with the deep love he had for the village. But Obinna also had dreams. He wanted to see the world, to build a life where he could grow beyond the boundaries of Umuadu. His heart yearned for more, for the kind of life the foreign company promised. But he could not shake the weight of the land, of the well, and of the people who had nurtured him. The question hung in the air, unspoken but clear. Could they reconcile their individual dreams with the collective dreams of the village? Could they find a way to move forward without losing everything that mattered? Chinyere knew that the decision was coming soon. The elders had already set a date for the vote. The fate of the land, and the future of the community, would be decided then. And as the days passed, the urgency of the situation pressed in on her. There was no turning back. She would have to choose, between her dreams, Obinna's dreams, and the life that awaited them in the village. The village was alive with tension as the meeting day approached. People were divided, with families aligning themselves on either side of the debate. Some argued that the foreign company's offer was a lifeline, a chance to bring modernity and prosperity to a village that had long struggled with poverty. Others were adamantly opposed, warning that selling the land would strip the village of its identity, its history, and its sense of community. Chinyere walked through the village, feeling the weight of the decision pressing in on her. It was as if the very air had changed, charged with an energy that was both electric and suffocating. Everywhere she went, she heard whispers, some hopeful, some fearful, all uncertain. She saw her neighbors, the farmers and the elders, the mothers and the children, all grappling with the same question. What would happen if the land was sold? Would they thrive or would they lose something irreplaceable? As Chinyere walked, her mind wandered to her conversations with Obinna. They had spoken of the future so many times now, each discussion circling around the same dilemma. They both dreamed of a different life, but neither of them wanted to be the one to pull away from the village. They wanted to stay connected to the land, but they also wanted to build something new, something better. She thought about the well, how it had been the heart of their village for as long as anyone could remember. It was where generations had gathered, where stories had been told, where families had grown. Could she really walk away from all of that? And yet, the thought of a different life, of a future beyond the narrow confines of Umuadu, filled her with longing. As she reached the well, she saw Obinna waiting for her, standing at the edge, his face thoughtful. The light of the setting sun cast a golden hue over the water, making the scene seem almost surreal. "We can't keep avoiding this, can we?" Obinna said, his voice soft, almost resigned. "The decision is coming, Chinyere. We have to choose." Chinyere's heart wavered. She had never been faced with such a difficult choice before. The village, the well, her family, they were all part of her, a part of who she was. But the world beyond the hills was calling to her, just as it had called to Obinna. What was more important, heritage or the hope of a new life? The day of the vote arrived and the entire village gathered in the community hall, the air thick with anticipation. The elders sat at the front, their faces grim as they prepared to lead the meeting. Chinyere and Obinna were among the many villagers who filed in, their hearts heavy with the weight of the decision. Everyone knew that the vote would change everything: the fate of the village, the future of their land, and the future of their community. The room was filled with murmurs as the debate began. The representatives of the foreign company spoke first, outlining the details of the offer and promising the village that the money would improve the lives of everyone in Umuadu. They spoke of new schools, new roads, new opportunities. For many, the promises were tempting. It was easy to imagine a future where their children would have access to things they had only dreamed of. But then the opposition spoke. The elders who had lived through generations of hardship reminded the villagers of the value of their heritage. They spoke of the deep ties to the land, of the traditions that had kept the village intact for centuries. They warned that selling the land would mean the loss of something irreplaceable, the very foundation of their lives. Chinyere sat in the crowd, her heart racing. She could feel the tension in the room, the weight of the decision pressing down on everyone. She turned to Obinna, her eyes searching his face for some sign of what he was thinking. He met her gaze, his expression unreadable. Finally it was time to vote. One by one each villager stepped forward to cast their ballot. Chinyere's hands trembled as she stood in line, her mind swirling with conflicting thoughts. She knew what was at stake and the fear of making the wrong choice gnawed at her. When it was her turn, Chinyere approached the voting box, her heart heavy. She glanced at Obinna one last time, and in that moment she knew that whatever decision they made, they would face it together. With a deep breath, she cast her vote. The atmosphere in the community hall was charged as the votes were counted. Chinyere could feel the weight of the moment pressing on her chest. The sound of the counting process seemed to stretch on for an eternity. Villagers whispered among themselves, some with hopeful smiles, others with anxious expressions. Every now and then, a sigh would ripple through the crowd as a result was announced. The elders, seated at the front of the room, watched in silence, their faces solemn as they awaited the final tally. Chinyere stood next to Obinna, her fingers clasped tightly together. She tried to steady her breath, but the anxiety within her made it nearly impossible to stay calm. She felt her heart racing, her pulse quickening with each passing minute. The decision would change everything. It would shape their futures, their relationship, and their connection to the land they had always known. Finally, after what felt like hours, the head elder stood up, his voice echoing through the hall as he called for silence. "The votes have been counted," he said gravely. "The decision has been made." Chinyere's breath hitched. She squeezed Obinna's hand, her body tense with anticipation. Obinna turned to her, his eyes filled with uncertainty, but also a hint of something else, hope, perhaps, or fear. They had both put so much into this decision, each of them carrying their own dreams, their own fears, and the weight of their family's expectations. "The vote is in favor of the foreign company," the elder continued, his voice heavy. "The land around the well will be sold. The compensation will be used to improve the infrastructure of the village." A stunned silence followed his announcement. Chinyere felt the ground shift beneath her feet. She had heard the rumors, but hearing it spoken aloud was a different experience entirely. Her heart sank, and for a moment the world around her blurred. She looked at Obinna, whose face was unreadable. He stood still, his eyes distant, as if he too was trying to process the enormity of the decision that had just been made. The crowd erupted into mixed reactions. Some cheered while others remained quiet, staring at the ground in disbelief. The debate had been fierce, and now that it was over, the reality of the choice was sinking in. Chinyere couldn't help but feel conflicted. The promise of progress was undeniable. There would be new roads, better schools, opportunities for their children to live better lives. But at the same time she couldn't ignore the feeling of loss. The well, the heart of the village, would no longer be the same. The land that had been their heritage for generations would be transformed into something entirely new, something foreign. She turned to Obinna, her voice trembling. "What now, Obinna? What do we do?" He looked down at her, his face solemn. "I don't know," he said quietly. "But we have each other. We'll figure it out. In that moment, Chinyere realized that the decision to sell the land wasn't just a loss for the village, it was a loss for her and Obinna too. The land that had once connected them to their heritage now seemed like a distant memory, one that they would have to carry with them as they moved forward. But even as that realization settled in, she knew they had a future together, one that they would have to build despite the changes. The days following the vote were filled with mixed emotions. The villagers, though still divided, began to make peace with the decision. Some were excited about the new possibilities, the promises of better schools and healthcare. Others mourned the loss of the well, the land, and the traditions that had been a part of their lives for generations. Chinyere could feel the quiet undercurrent of sorrow in the village, the sense that something precious had been lost in the name of progress. Obinna and Chinyere met by the well, now empty and silent, for the first time since the vote. The sun had set and the air was cooler, the familiar sound of water flowing no longer present. The place that had once felt like the heart of the village now seemed empty, its significance fading with the passing of time. They sat on the ground beside the well, their legs stretched out, each lost in their thoughts. "I can't believe it's really happening," Chinyere said softly, her voice tinged with sadness. "The well? It feels like we're losing more than just land." Obinna nodded, his gaze fixed on the ground. "It's hard to accept. But maybe this is the only way forward. Maybe this change will bring something better for the village." Chinyere didn't reply immediately. She wasn't sure if she believed that. It was hard to see the promise of a better future when the past felt so much like a part of her. The idea of leaving behind the well, the village, everything she had ever known, was difficult to reconcile with her dreams for the future. "What about us, Obinna?" she asked quietly, turning to face him. "What do we do now? Do we stay and try to make this work, or do we leave like we've always talked about?" Obinna looked at her, his eyes searching hers. "I think we need to leave, Chinyere. I think we need to find our own path, away from all of this. But I don't want to leave without you. Whatever happens, I want to be with you." Chinyere's heart swelled at his words. She had always known that Obinna was meant to be a part of her life, but now, more than ever, she realized that they could only face the future together. It wouldn't be easy and the world beyond the village would be full of challenges. But with Obinna by her side, she felt a glimmer of hope. "We'll make it work," Chinyere said, her voice stronger now. "Together we'll find a way." As the foreign company began their work on the land, the village transformed before Chinyere's eyes. New roads were laid, and the first stages of construction on what would soon become a sprawling resort were underway. The familiar landmarks of her childhood, the well, the mango trees, the narrow dirt paths, began to disappear beneath the weight of change. It was as though the village was being erased, its past buried beneath the concrete and steel of the future. But Chinyere and Obinna remained resolute. They knew that they could not change the past, but they could shape their future. They packed their belongings, said their goodbyes, and left the village behind, heading toward a new life, one that they would build together from the ground up. As they left the village, Chinyere felt a strange sense of liberation. It was difficult to let go of everything she had known, but at the same time, it felt like the beginning of something new. The world beyond Umuadu awaited them, and although the road ahead was uncertain, they would face it together. With Obinna by her side, Chinyere felt ready to embrace the future. The village, the well, the land, they would always be a part of her, but now it was time to forge her own path. As the weeks passed, Chinyere and Obinna found a new rhythm in their lives. The changes they had discussed were not immediate, but they began to take shape slowly in small but meaningful ways. The business continued to grow, but now it wasn't just about increasing orders or expanding her reach. She was more intentional with her work, taking time to design each piece with love and care. The travels had infused her creativity with new ideas and inspirations, but more importantly, they had given her a sense of purpose beyond profit. She began holding workshops for local artisans, teaching them the techniques she had learned abroad, and the community she had once felt disconnected from slowly began to embrace her again. Her shop had become a space for collaboration and shared stories, and this sense of community gave Chinyere the fulfillment she had been searching for when she first left Umuadu. She had traveled far and seen much, but it was here, back in this small town, that she felt she could make the most impact. The artisans she worked with were no longer just employees. They were partners, friends, and co-creators in the art they produced. Each day, the shop buzzed with laughter and the hum of creativity as Chinyere and her team worked side by side, crafting pieces that told the story of their journey. Obinna, too, found a renewed sense of satisfaction in his work. After their travels, he felt the call to do more than just manage the farm. He had always been drawn to agriculture, but his passion for the land and for sustainable farming had deepened on their trip. Inspired by the organic farming techniques he had seen in other countries, he decided to implement more eco-friendly practices on the farm where he worked. It wasn't easy, change never was, but with time he gained the support of the farm's owner and started seeing the benefits of his new approach. Obinna's passion for sustainable agriculture became something of a personal mission, and soon he was sharing his knowledge with other local farmers, helping them adopt environmentally friendly practices. He spent his weekends hosting workshops on crop rotation, water conservation, and organic fertilizers, teaching people that the health of the land was directly tied to the health of their communities. The small ripple of change he had begun to foster in his corner of the world began to grow, and as he looked at the results, Obinna knew he had found a new purpose in his work. Despite their growing businesses and the responsibilities that came with them, Chinyere and Obinna never lost sight of their relationship. They still made time for the simple moments that had brought them together in the first place, sharing meals, taking walks in the park, and enjoying quiet evenings in front of the fireplace. They knew that a successful life wasn't just about their individual achievements, it was about building something together, hand in hand. With their newfound sense of balance and purpose, Chinyere and Obinna's life in the town began to feel more fulfilling. The pressures of their earlier years had diminished, and they had learned to embrace the present. Their businesses continued to thrive, but now it was less about the hustle and more about the impact they could make. Chinyere's craft shop was a success, but it had evolved into a community space where artisans came together to create, learn, and grow. It had become more than just a store, it was a place that celebrated culture, shared knowledge, and supported each other. Her connection to her roots and heritage had strengthened, not just through her work but through her relationships with the people she met along the way. Obinna's work at the farm had flourished, and his passion for sustainable agriculture had earned him the respect of many farmers in the region. He had become an advocate for environmental awareness, helping others understand the importance of preserving the land and its resources. His belief in sustainable practices not only brought tangible benefits to the farm but also fostered a sense of community among the local farmers. It was a slow process, but Obinna's work was slowly changing how people viewed agriculture in the region, and he felt a deep sense of pride in that. Together they found purpose in what they were building. But more than that, they realized they were no longer just chasing success for the sake of achievement. They had found a sense of fulfillment, through their work, through their relationships, and most importantly, through their shared journey. Chinyere had always dreamed of something more than the life Amuadu had offered her, but now, as she stood beside Obinna, she realized that the world she had been searching for had always been within her reach. They spent their evenings together, talking about their dreams for the future. The pressure of making big decisions had passed, but that didn't mean they had stopped dreaming. They still talked about traveling the world, expanding their businesses, and sharing their experiences with others. But it wasn't just about building something grand, it was about building a life that was meaningful, one that brought joy and purpose. They had already learned that no matter where they were, the most important thing was being true to themselves and each other. One evening, as they sat outside on their porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in vibrant colors, Obinna turned to Chinyere. "Do you ever think about what we left behind?" he asked, his voice soft. Chinyere smiled, her heart full. "Sometimes yes," she said, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "But I realize now that what we left behind was just a chapter. The story we're writing now, it's ours. And it's only just beginning." Obinna nodded, his eyes filled with quiet confidence. "We've come so far, haven't we?" Chinyere's hand found his and she squeezed it gently. "We have. And I'm so grateful for every step of the journey. For us." They sat in companionable silence as the last rays of the sun faded into twilight, knowing that whatever the future held, they would face it together. As time passed, Chinyere and Obinna's bond deepened, and so did their commitment to the futures they were building. Their work had become an extension of themselves, both a reflection of their values and a means of creating something larger than what they had ever imagined. The craft shop, once a small idea, now had a growing presence not just in their town, but in the wider region. With the support of the artisans they worked with, Chinyere expanded her collection, opening new avenues for local creators to showcase their talents. She had started offering design workshops for other artisans, where they could come together to learn from each other, share techniques, and collaborate. Slowly but surely, her shop had grown into something far more impactful than a business. It had become a cultural hub, where stories were shared, traditions were kept alive, and creativity thrived. Meanwhile, Obinna had made significant strides in the world of sustainable farming. His advocacy for eco-friendly practices had begun to spread beyond the farm where he worked. He was invited to speak at conferences, collaborate with environmental groups, and mentor other farmers who wanted to implement similar practices. The small changes he had made in his corner of the agricultural world had started to ripple outward, affecting entire communities. He had begun to see the full scope of his work and how his dedication could shape not just his future, but that of generations to come. Together they had built something beautiful. Their individual paths had merged into a shared journey, one that embraced not only their ambitions but also the lessons they had learned along the way. They no longer had to choose between their dreams and their heritage. They had found a way to honor both. They had left Umuadu behind, but in a sense they had carried it with them, woven into the fabric of their work, their love, and their lives. Chinyere sat at her desk one afternoon, looking through her sketches. She had just completed a new design inspired by the colors and patterns she had seen in Morocco, and her heart swelled with excitement at the thought of showcasing it in the upcoming market. It was a fusion of old and new, a reflection of everything she had experienced since leaving the village. It wasn't just a piece of art, it was a testament to the journey she and Obinna had taken together. Obinna came in, his face lighting up as he saw her. "You're deep in thought, aren't you?" Chinyere smiled up at him. "Always. But today it's a good kind of thought." "I can see that," Obinna said, walking over to her and leaning in for a kiss. "You've created something incredible, Chinyere. And together we've built something even more incredible." Chinyere stood up, wrapping her arms around him. "We have, haven't we? I wouldn't have done any of this without you." Obinna kissed the top of her head. "And I wouldn't have done it without you." As they stood there, holding each other in the warmth of their home, Chinyere realized that their journey was far from over. There were still many dreams to chase, many paths to explore. But they had each other, and that made all the difference. Whatever came next, they would face it together, ready to write the next chapter of their lives. Years passed, and the life Chinyere and Obinna had built together continued to flourish. Their business ventures expanded, their influence grew, and their love deepened. They were no longer just two individuals navigating the world, they were partners in every sense, building a future that was filled with hope, creativity, and purpose. The lessons they had learned, both in Umuadu and in the wider world, had shaped them into the people they were today. One morning, as they walked through the local market, holding hands and laughing together, Chinyere looked around at the vibrant community they had helped nurture. The artisans she worked with were thriving, and the town, once quiet and isolated, had become a bustling hub for creativity and collaboration. She couldn't help but feel proud of everything they had accomplished, knowing that their journey had been just as important as the destination. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" she said, turning to Obinna. "We have," he replied, his smile full of affection. "And I wouldn't change a thing." They continued walking through the market, knowing that the road ahead was still unfolding, but feeling confident in the future they had already started to build. Together they had created something lasting, something that honored their past and embraced the future. The story of Chinyere and Obinna was far from over, but it was already one for the ages. They had not only found each other, but they had found a life worth living, full of love, purpose, and the promise of tomorrow.